Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sean Lang. I've spent the last several years building and operating a digital agency that's grown past 75 people. And I've definitely learned a few things about what really matters when things get complex and when you're trying to build something that is a scalable asset and maybe down the road, even a sellable one. Just a reminder before we get into the episode, we've got a free community with tons of helpful agency resources, templates, AI tools, etc. You can get that over at agencyuplift.co/group. But enough about that. Today, I'm joined by Dominic Wong, Managing Director of Invoke. Invoke transforms ideas into market-ready software across industries. They're your extended team for seamless product launches. Dom, it's great to have you on, man.
Good to have you. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. So tell me a bit about Invoke.
Yeah, Invoke's been around for a really long time. It's the most well known for creating the social media giant Hootsuite. They're a software company that we work directly with large enterprises and on the other spectrum with startups, kind of taking a very scrappy approach to digital transformation and launching new ideas off into the market. We've had a lot of history working with startups, building companies, putting them out to market. So taking that exact same process and mindset towards any sort of size. It could be single founder, early stage startup team, and a lot of innovation groups that are within organizations, medium-sized orgs or large enterprise orgs that have troubles putting things out there. And our team, we've got a team of 20, and we've kind of kept to our DNA for the past decade or so, just to make sure that we're focused on digital products and helping people launch their ideas.
Very cool. Definitely a little bit different than the majority of the guests that we've had on. And actually, one thing that I'd love to dig into is you didn't actually technically found this, right? So can you walk us through sort of your origin story of how you came to be running Invoke?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, a part of this is just that agencies and companies all follow the identity of the people that lead it, the people who have founded it, right? You're right. I didn't find it. Ryan Holmes, Dario Melli, and David Pedman were three co-founders that started Invoke back in the day when the social media wave and the social media boom was happening. At around 2010, I was hired on as a interactive designer. This is before all product UX UI even became a thing, and was very focused on the design discipline of it. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, right before COVID, had I known, smart choice. Um, we had a spot opening. CEO had just parted, and there was a part of me that just deeply, having gone through so many different identity shifts of Invoke and the company, I knew the projects, I knew the teams, I knew the clients, I knew how to harness everything, or I thought I did, And then I said, like, I'll do it. We had two other directors at that time who were willing to kind of help support that role and kind of steady the ship per se. And that was a pretty new shift in the role. I'm managing director. I've kind of didn't really take up the CEO role for quite a long time, but there's a lot of people who just say like you're essentially doing that role anyways. But very happy about running the company, growing new talent, bridging new relationships and everything too. So it was quite a bit of a shift from going from a design lead, building a design practice over to something that a managing director or a CEO does.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a huge shift. What was the biggest shift in terms of moving from a designer to, or someone who's being responsible for, just great design to someone who's literally being responsible for the entire business?
Yeah, I mean, the I've always felt like I've when I was leading design, I was focused on the discipline, right? Like making sure we have the right network and the connections from a design perspective, making sure we're covering ground and bringing in and growing good talent. When it all shifted to running a company, all the operations, that year alone, don't even think about COVID, but like that year alone was so much unraveling of the operations, the details, the AR, AP, I'm sure everybody else knows from an agency perspective. Um, and that was something really difficult to wrap my head around because, there needed a lot of maybe context setting and understanding that, hey, this is not my doing. And this is, but now I'm holding the reins to it. So I've got to, resolve all of those issues or challenges, but also find my way in, like it's worth digging in and navigating and kind of poking at what are all the details of this organization that had already been established, um, that maybe throughout the time that I was in the design position that I didn't have visibility over. And
Mhm.
now I do have visibility and control and decision over. So let's figure out what those things are and if it's right for the DNA. Um, if I could sidebar, I think the very, very first thing I did when I like took on this role was I made sure I talked to the original founders and I said, look, I think a key part of this, I'm not here right now at this moment to like paint a crazy big vision, but I'd really like us to anchor back to the DNA that we had when, you guys started this company and created Hootsuite and all these other companies. And that is the DNA of building good products, building good companies, shipping good experiences, and making sure that the team is focused on that. That was also a pretty big shift because, there are agencies who try to be full service, um, and they've got really strong, talented teams, but we kind of decided to always stay in a team of between 11 to 20 just to stay scrappy, operating like a startup team. But that also requires like understanding all of the kind of operational layers, culture layers to how the company had operated and if that aligned with how I want to see things.
Yeah. So many different questions I could ask here. When you stepped into the seat, when you became the guy, I mean, I know that part of it is you actually just probably opening all of the doors and seeing what's actually in all of the dark corners of the closets and being like, "Oh, I didn't know that we had that." And like, was there let's say uh, operational debt that you had to account for even before you got to sort of like choose your own vision?
Yeah, 100%. Just being very, very open and blunt, there was um, messy AR. There was some AP, and there was all of these operational decisions made about the office, the partnerships, certain staff that I'm just like, why was this decision made? And it was important for me to like try to write that as professionally and as responsibly as possible.
Mhm.
I can't just like, rip the wires and then suddenly plug in something else. Like that never felt like my personality on how to run a company. So 100%, there was a lot of that operational debt, and I think that for the next 2+ years, this was still during COVID, we were still finding out new things, and it almost was like, all right, we will just have to brace for it and deal with it, understand why those things are happening, and also be savvy about it, right? I think another sidebar is like I've got a tremendous leadership team that I trust. Kiara's our operations manager, and the thing is, all of these people were peers of mine before I stepped up into the managing director role. So there's a lot of trust there. There was a lot of like clear communication built. But it also meant that we had to brace for all of these surprises and figure out how to deal with them. And I think the biggest part is not be reactive and to really come to the solution that is right and good for the company and good for the longevity of the company. We were very proud that, I kind of say every offsite that we have of our team, like, we're still alive in the day and age where agencies are, based on opinion, either thriving or dying. We're still alive. We got through so much, and especially going through COVID, and that kind of recession that came with it. Um, yeah, I was very appreciative of the team that understood that operationally we had to deal with a lot,
Yeah.
while the team also had to maybe, like, hold the buck on the project front, the client fronts. And we made sure that we'd try to be as transparent and honest as possible every chance we get, so that the team understands the reality of working at Invoke, the reality of being a team. So,
Yeah. So many layers to it. When you stepped into this new role, was there perhaps a skill set um, that you felt that you didn't have when you took over the role that you have since kind of like built something that was kind of that has enabled you to sort of do this effectively?
yeah, I've said this before, but like, this this one thing that I was resisting the most when I was leading a design team and practice and heading up design was, I did I did not care about expanding, nurturing, building my network. And then as soon as I stepped into this role, I was like, okay, I didn't do any of that. And then whereas, I look at, not comparing, but I look at other friends, other people who are also running agencies, and they've spent 10, 20, 30 years building relationships, X relationships, the X blast radiuses, X, X large media agencies and whatnot. And those are all relationships that ended up lasting. And I thought, wow, okay, I've had some really good people in my life. I've worked with some really good people, but I never bothered to like nurture and come back to it or spend time, effort, and attention on it. And then I think part of that also in the new role, I also resisted in like, I didn't want to be a salesperson. And and I think core identity wise, there was like, I'm a creative, I'm a designer. That's what I'm most comfortable in. That's what I love. But I don't love selling. And and that was a role that I never kind of got comfortable in. That also meant like building the network. That also meant learning to talk about Invoke and what we do more. It meant talking about our history. It meant also immersing into other people's situations, businesses, understanding what they're covering. And that took so long to like build, right? Like the two things, right? The network, and secondly, just the narrative and the language of having that conversation and building those, sustaining those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm naturally like a relationship person and a people person, but I've always felt this like guard against selling,
Mhm.
and that was a pretty big piece, right?
That's very, very similar to my own experience, in that I found, like, when we were building the company, especially in the earlier days, I took an operations role. I was COO, and I let my partner, the CEO, I let him basically handle all relationship, and I thought, "It's my job to build the machine and to keep this thing running. What do I need relationships for? He's got the relationships covered." And as we kinda, like, built and built and built and years and years and years went by, I just realized that I was kind of on an island. And I've spent the last, 2 or 3 years kinda, like, just kicking myself and trying to make up for lost time and unbuilt relationships, which is, again, part of what this podcast is this is a relationship engine. I'm building relationships in bulk, at scale with all these great folks in the industry, such as yourself. But that was a huge one for me as well. And I also really resonate with the part about getting comfortable with sales, because I always told myself that sales is this kind of um, it's not a noble thing. It's not something that people want. It's something that kind of feels icky. It's we don't want to sell, right? If the business comes, then let the business come, but I don't want to have to sell. But I think that especially as CEO, I think that at least starting and being deep in sales for a decent amount of time is very, very important because it's nothing is going to get you closer to your market than sales. Nothing is actually going to get you better, faster, more timely, more accurate feedback than just having sales conversations and understanding what people actually think about what about or what their problems are and the services that you're offering and getting those objections and really actually just like learning and of course also just building the network and building relationships. So um I wasn't expecting you to say either of those things, but also I'm so glad that you did because those are so critical, so key. And I think that when we kind of zoom out to the macro and look at the average agency owner that's probably listening to this right now, the majority of them, kind of similar to you and me, started out as a individual contributor or a specialist doing something technical, and it's very very hard to pull yourself and your identity away from seeing that as the most valuable thing that you do. But ultimately, once you're moving from individual contributor to an actual like building a company, um, suddenly you realize that there's a huge gap in the skill set that you have versus the thing that you need in order to now do the thing that you're trying to do, which is run a company, make it better, grow it, etc. So just full agreement from my side on all fronts there.
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, a couple of things I'll quickly add. It When you talked about the coming from the individual contributor side, there requires deeply honestly, it requires this like you need to be open-minded. You need to like stretch yourself and like all these hats that you see, you kind of have to be familiar with all of those hats, even if you're not like a specialist or great at them. I know that I've had so many conversations where I've said, I'm not the best financial operator. Like that, someone else will have to take care of that. Like from a fractional CFO standpoint or Kiara, who's our ops manager, I'm great at the relationships. I'm great at like building, communicating and showing the vision, talking about the long game. Let that be my like focus. But I think oftentimes a lot of people, especially agency owners, I've talked to a lot of them too, get so worn out with having to do literally everything. And that really affects, their mental health, their ability to be strong or their ability to like go out there, right? Second thing I'll quickly say, like when we talk about this, like, sales and going out there, two people said this to me. One guy, and I'll never forget, he goes, people never think about you. And that's like, when he said that, I just never forget that because people never think about you. You kind of have to be up in front and center. Or the challenge is you've got to make sure that people do think about you or the right people think about you. Secondly, another guy I was talking to, this was maybe end of last year, he goes, why are you so afraid of selling? You believe your work is good, right? You believe you have proof that your work delivered well and you have the good relationships. Then why are you afraid to sell or why do you think that it's aggressive? Just be yourself, right? And so those things really help kind of like crack the code or unlock that, kind of guardedness a little bit. So,
Absolutely, and I think it can be very important to really really slow down and actually just look at the value that the services that you provide actually create and the impact. I was talking to a newer agency owner who's actually one of the more consulting style episodes on the podcast. Every now and then I'll have like a newer agency owner come on and we'll just kind of go through what's going on and I'll give him some advice and it makes for good content. And we went through kind of like the ROI that his service is actually providing to his clients. And I said, "Are you tracking this?" He's like, "Well, not really." And I said, "Are you reporting this to the clients?" And he said, "Well, not really." I said, "Do you understand the absolute insanely massive impact you're having on the lives of your clients, which is allowing them to have a positive impact on their sphere, which is like it's actually if we do a good job for our clients, I mean, we should feel incredibly proud of that. If we do a good job for our clients and we know that, it actually it creates a ripple effect in your client's community as well. And I think we kind of forget that. Sometimes we think, well, I'm just trying to create a transaction here. Like if that is actually all you believe in terms of your agency and what business is, then maybe you should get out of business, because ultimately the work that we do, if done well and done honestly, is hugely valuable to everyone. And you should remember that when you're selling as well, because honestly, you should be excited. You should be excited to position it to the people who could benefit from it, because like it's kind of like you're cold and I've got fire. Like I can I can warm you up. Like I'm so excited to do that for you.
The something else that you kicked a memory up is that it's as proud as I am about building the relationships and expanding the network, and now I'm 6 years later, I'm very comfortable with that. I'm still learning though, but a big part of that is also just making sure that it's not just about the relationship too. Like you said, make sure you're communicating ROI. And I think that was also another challenge to kind of face or identify, which is as an individual contributor, the patterns is always, I'm going to do, deliver, I'm going to do, deliver, think, deliver, all of that. But at the end of the day, like you kind of have to still talk about what is the value that you created for them.
Mhm.
And that hits a whole different set of audience, right? Some of the conversations I've had recently were saying, I don't come from an enterprise background or a corporate background. I've stayed away from that forever. It's just been startups, agencies, small businesses. But that also meant that I don't have the muscles or way of navigating those enterprise and corporate situations. And Holden, a good friend, he just said, when you got to get the attention of these people that are up here, who are those decision makers, by speaking about the ROI and what you've delivered. It's not about the transaction. It's not about the craft. It's about like, are you returning? They care about the revenue. They care about if they're creating new IP. They care about have they improved their like internal processes and their team. Make sure you talk about those things, and that's going to draw people in. Or it's going to draw people in via interest. Like we've done work with D-Wave, quantum computing company, and it's surprising how many people always just say, "Oh, you guys did quantum." So it's a kind of starting conversation here too. So I thought I'd just mention
Absolutely.
that because I realize that like much like myself or what you just said, um, I need to also remind myself that communicating ROI and being clear about the value that was created is going to be beneficial. And it's hard because we're in a field of innovation, like tech and innovation. I was just saying to a guy um, who's the innovation head at HP, I said, there's a lot of contracts where we can't say what we're delivering because innovation is like you kind of have to discover it and find that out.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's kind of another step of figuring out how to be clear about that value because it's not prescriptive and it's not like predetermined to say like what you need to do for these groups.
That I think that would be so difficult. I mean, I come from a performance marketing background, which is kind of like we all know what the results are going to be and we're going to push for
Mm.
results and here are the targets and we're going to review whether we're hitting them or not. It's very cut and dry. It's either we have the measurable results or we don't. I can't even imagine what that's like going in from something that's a little bit less tangible, at least upfront with innovation. Because like you said, like we don't know what it's going to be until until we get it. Um, how do you navigate that?
Um, Me and Narav from HP were just talking about we called it like innovation accounting, I guess. I know it's a pretty boring term, but we were saying if we're not able to prescribe and say these are the results that are delivered. Obviously, we can say like here are artifacts that are delivered. Um, I think we may have to go towards communicating how many hypotheses we've run, validated, shut down, and which hypotheses proved right to turn into like market ready or production ready products or ideas. So that seems, you know, it's still a work in progress, but like that seems to be the narrative in mind right now of, you know, there's going to be a lot of ideas, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. If we're working with a large enterprise, do we say that based on all of these opportunities, we're going to help gun and go and figure out if there's three potential market ready opportunities that can get out there. So then that becomes a little bit more like quantifiable. And we don't get hassled by procurement saying, "What do you guys do?" And then, you
Yeah.
know, like then we get just thrown into like the UX bucket or the dev implementation bucket, you know. So it was
Right.
yeah, it's still something we're figuring out, but I think we've kind of started to talk about innovation accounting or innovation metrics.
Right.
So
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. This is so interesting to me. Um, the way I'm thinking about it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but uh, it seems like some of the real upside to nailing innovation would be actually to be creating leverage for the client that you're working with, and leverage isn't always immediately obvious, and it
totally
almost it almost seems to me that you would benefit from engineering in some kind of like long view, like 1 year after the project has finished, like what actually happened, what,
right.
you know, the 1 year checkup, the 5 year checkup, so you can say like we zoomed way out and the leverage created from the innovation actually resulted in, you know, like $300 million of new business, whatever. But like because you wouldn't actually know at the start or even at the end of the engagement, until you can kind of like look at the downstream effects.
Yeah, possibly not. Because sometimes, you know, because we're so early stage, and we may with some companies we don't stay that long. Like we may not know what those downstream effects might be, right? And I think that, you know, we could also take a page out of the performance marketing book too, which is just like, well, are we aiming to go to market with X amount of partners? Are we aiming for, you know, a certain number of early adopters? And also, you know, are we classifying ourselves, whether it's the product, the idea, the technology, the team, as, you know, people who have, you know, started to engage into a white space opportunity that actually will benefit the company in the longer run because it's a core revenue generator, or it's a part of the larger ecosystem that we've done. You know, maybe we did a big data play with a product that helped them change and transform the way that their industry, how they're operating in the industry. We've done that with hospitality. We've done that with mobility. We've done that with automotive OEM, financial insurance, like that kind of. Those are kind of the industries that I've now started to lean heavily on because that's just more of our experience. But we can say, you know, we did this that ended up changing the mindset and, you know, the operations of these groups of people. Much like how, you know, nowadays I know AI is just forever talked about, but like, you know, how AI is meant to help with a lot of operational efficiencies, right? Like, is there a way to come back and measure, is the cost of what we did or the cost of investing into Invoke and Invoke's team to go, you know, do innovation, has it netted out 3x, 10x, like 50x? And has that actually also created new avenues for us to now explore other opportunities? So
I think that's
I'm
fascinating.
learning as we're talking here right now too, because like,
That's that honestly, that's sometimes one of the best things is just talking about what you already know, and when you talk about it out loud, you start to hear new angles even out of the, you know, the words that are coming out of your own mouth. Like, oh, I just said that. I never really considered that, and now I have a new way to think about it. I mean, it's funny because I'm an introvert, and yet I learn so much more about my own thoughts when I force myself just to have these conversations with people, which again is a kind of
100%.
a self-serving benefit of having the podcast, is I just get to talk about these things all day long with people and be like, oh, I never considered that. I guess I do. I think that. I think that. Um, Dominic, it's been so Great to have you on. This has been a very, very interesting conversation to me. Where can people find out more about you and Invoke?
Find out more about Invoke at builtbyinvoke.ca. Look me up on LinkedIn, Instagram. Happy to connect. I think based on what we've all talked about, I've been much more comfortable, making time for folks. And to be honest, some of these are the more interesting parts of my day. Not having to look at paperwork, RFPs, resolutions of stuff. So find me on there. And then cheap plug, we actually spun out a AI computer vision startup that I've co-founded. Invoke helped built. It's called Chunks. It's meant to take long form video and use AI to find the best moments out of long videos or massive amounts of media called Chunks. So chunks.com.
Very cool. Everyone, check that out. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely.